sticks, long-haired weirdos, short-haired weirdos, vandals, hooligans.
The government, hug the government, love the government, hug the government, love the government, hug the government.
Welcome to The Politics Guys, a place for bipartisan, rational, and civil debate on American politics and policy. I'm Michael Baranowski, a political scientist at Northern Kentucky University. With me today is my regular co-host, Cleveland area attorney and Republican factotum, Jay Carson.
Good morning, Mike.
Good morning, Jay. How are you today?
I'm doing good. How are you?
I am doing okay, I suppose. So, a few weeks ago, we did the show where you took over and ran things, and that went so well. I was so comfortable in the passenger seat. I thought that we would do the same thing again. So if you're ready to go, I will just turn things over to you.
Yeah, once again, as Alexander Haig famously said, I'm in charge here. So our first story that we're going to be talking about today is that the House, the Democratic-controlled House, not unexpectedly, voted to block President Trump's national emergency on border security. The vote was 245 to 182, with 13 Republicans, House Republicans, joining Democrats in approving the resolution. This would sort of set the stage for the next step, which would have to get Senate approval, and then would almost certainly, in fact, President Trump has said he would 100% veto it, and then thus sending it back to the Senate to have a veto overridden. And there are also parallel actions going forward in the courts with the state of California and others already suing regarding this. So I guess we'll start there. I know Ken and Will talked about this, or Ken and Trey talked about this last week. But you and I can have sort of a deeper dive, further discussion on this. So where do you think this goes next, and what do you see the bigger meaning of this being?
Well, I've been thinking about this a lot for obvious reasons. In fact, I spent a lot of time talking about it in my political institutions class just a couple of days ago, and trying to work through everything that's going on here. It seemed to me that there are three big questions. And okay,
here's you like the list.
I do love lists. Maybe it's just the professor in me, but here's the way I'm kind of formulating this. The first question is, and to me this might be the most important question, is, does the National Emergencies Act violate the delegation clause? And I think before we get into the other questions, maybe I should explain what that means to folks, for those who don't know. And basically, of course, we have this thing called, as you know, Jay, separation of powers, and that only the legislature is allowed to, legislate. And so there's this thing called this non-delegation doctrine, saying that even if Congress wants to give away its legislative power to the executive, it can't do that because, the framers thought that would be a bad idea, whether Congress wants to protect its powers or not. The concept of separation of powers is incredibly important. And so the question here, and this is, to me, is the main kind of constitutional question, does this National Emergencies Act, which gives the president, various powers to do things once he declares a national emergency, is that an unconstitutional delegation of power? So I don't know. I don't know if the National Emergencies Act itself is, because all it really says is, the president can declare a national emergency, and then there are these other things that that Congress can.
So the first question is it unconstitutional on its face, and then sort of the second, unconstitutional as applied?
Yeah, exactly. And it seems to me that this whole notion of emergency powers is at least questionable. It's not necessarily an easy question to answer, especially in instances in which Congress has specifically declined to spend money on something. Because there's no question that the appropriation power is Congress's. And so in a case where Congress has specifically declined to spend money on something, and then the president uses the emergency power and the powers related to that Congress has delegated to spend that money, Well, that to me seems at least questionable from a constitutional
Well,
standpoint.
and I think we talked, not to interrupt the three, not to get you off the list, but I mean, yeah, there's sort of a spectrum of the jurisprudence and looking at this, and it kind of mirrors common sense. Where, look, if there's a situation where Congress has indicated its approval of a certain policy, and the president asserts emergency powers and acts in essentially with that same the same spirit of whatever the congressional approval was, the president is on fairly solid ground. If next Congress has sort of remained silent as to the policy, it's a little shakier. But where Congress has explicitly um, gone the other way, you're a much tougher ground. And again, as we've discussed before, there's not a ton of case law on this. Typically, because if you're in that higher tier sort of thing, nobody complains.
Right. Yeah. And then so I think that's the main question, and certainly that will go through the courts, and we'll see what happens there. But a second question to me is, assuming that the National Emergencies Act or the other statutes that are related to it that unlock those powers, assuming that's not an unconstitutional delegation of powers, then to me the second question is, well, does the situation at the border constitute a national emergency? I mean, is that something that the president can call a national emergency? And to me, it seems like, well, the language of the act basically says that it is whatever the president says it is. But then it's a question of, well, could the president say, oh, I lost my remote control, that's a national emergency? Obviously not. So there's kind of a plain meaning understanding of the terms, and you can't violate that. And in almost all past instances that it's been applied, I think the situation has been what any most reasonable people would say is, yes, national emergency. But this seems to be a little more questionable. And so to me, that's then the second question is, well, does this constitute a national emergency? I mean, even if the court is willing to give deference to the president in determining that, and I think that certainly the Supreme Court has a majority willing to do that, does this stretch beyond the sort of the plain meaning of national emergency, which would allow the president to invoke that? What do you think?
Yeah, well, I would first think that I'd agree that courts would give deference to a president, and probably ought to give deference to a president in determining what a national emergency is. Just because otherwise you've got a situation where you really have courts sort of assuming executive power. You know what I mean? And I think that's right. It's almost like a double delegation. You know what I mean? Sort of. Congress sort of punts to the executive, and then the Supreme Court sort of takes on what is really sort of would be an executive function, assuming it's properly delegated. So I really think courts do not want to be in the business of determining what's an emergency or not an emergency. I think you're right. If it is something that is so outside the commonly understood meaning of emergency, courts would say, no, come on, that's ridiculous. But I think if it's going to be sort of, to use the constitutional parlance, sort of a rational, rational
basis,
reasoning, rational basis sort of standard that, look, if you can come up with any sort of basis to say that this is a national emergency, even if it's not a good one, even if we would disagree, even if most people would disagree, as long as it's not, completely out of left field, we'll give deference to it. And I think that's probably where courts would end up on this. The other thing I think is interesting is, if I'm a court, at what point do I take this up? At what point does it become a ripe case? Because there's there's what's called the doctrine of exhaustion of remedies, which means that, look, you gotta go through all the other hoops first before you go to court. And I would think, look, there's a plain legislative remedy here that has not been played out yet. And I'm curious if that's.
Yeah, no, I think it's an interesting point. But, to me, it seems to me that this is actually a pretty easy question, because you can make a non-ridiculous case that this is a national emergency. I don't agree that it is. I think a lot of people don't agree, but it seems to me that that's a failing of the legislation. Congress could have passed legislation stipulating what would or wouldn't qualify as a national emergency. They chose, for various reasons, to not do that. And so if we admit that, yes, this is not an improper delegation of power, then given how the statute is written, I think this is well within the president's right to declare as a national emergency, even though I don't actually agree that it is, in fact, a national emergency.
Well, there's also some exceptions in the language gearing towards military construction.
Well, yeah, and that I'm glad you mentioned that, because that's my third point. Is even if
I'm sorry, I didn't.
No. I mean, it's almost like we didn't rehearse this before, but no, it's a perfect kind of segue, because that's my third issue here. Is even if it doesn't violate the delegation clause, and this can be considered a national emergency by whatever standard, we still have to answer the question of, well, then do the other statutes that the president's relying on give him the authority to build the wall? And the statute that the administration has mentioned as giving him the authority says that the president can only do this during a national emergency that requires the use of the armed forces and for the purposes of construction projects to support those troops. And so that's kind of a iffy question as well. This is clearly not a straightforward answer to this either.
Right. It's you're not necessarily building an army base or something like that, but it is. And I think there's a conceivable rational basis that you can make a connection.
Yeah, well, I think that is the weakest of the 3 points that the administration has, and I think if it's going to be overturned, Trump's doing this, I think it will be on that third question. And so I'm sure that some lower courts will see it that way. Now, as to the Supreme Court, I don't know, and I think I mentioned this in a previous show. That one of the things that the president's done in his 2 appointments is he's found people who are very, I guess you could say, deferential to executive power on this. And so it wouldn't surprise me if there were a 5-4 decision at some point that basically said, yeah, he can go ahead and reappropriate this money essentially and build this wall. I hope that's not the decision, but if it comes out that way, it certainly wouldn't surprise me.
Well, although you say, I mean, I think his picks being not deferential, I would argue maybe to the contrary, specifically Kavanaugh, which the rap on Kavanaugh, the other rap on Kavanaugh, was that the concern that he would remove the Chevron style deference that was granted to administrative agencies in interpreting statutes, and which is again sort of goes to that delegation question, and he has been sort of tough on that in the Court of Appeals. So I don't know. I'm curious again. Then this is a route that hasn't been explored much in the media. And again, this is early in the process. But does the court get to a point saying, look, there is a political remedy here, right? It's almost of the nature of a political question, and it's built in there into the statute. So if the statute is not on its face an unconstitutional delegation, well then yeah, and I think you got your remedy, and you build
yeah. No, I think it's
a
great
Congress
point.
write better statutes.
I think it's a great point because certainly that's one reasonable argument to say, well, there is a remedy, and if 2/3 of the House and the Senate decide that the president has gone too far in declaring this national emergency or building this wall, they can act, and just like in any normal legislative process. And so that's why
the statute in and of itself sets makes Congress the determiner of whether it's a reasonable national emergency or not.
Right. And just because it's difficult for Congress to do that, because it's hard to get 2/3. I mean, I'm sure I'm not going to say I'm sure, but I'm sure if President Trump said something absolutely insane was a national emergency, like Canadians coming over the border and we need to build a wall from, in, I don't know, Wisconsin or something like that. I'm pretty sure that 2/3 of both the House and the Senate would vote to overturn a presidential veto on that. Would be my
just not
guess.
reported much in the mainstream media, but
yeah,
the Canadian invasion.
Yeah, exactly.
Canadian threat's real, Mike.
But you get what I'm saying, and so I don't really think. I mean, there are a lot of folks saying this sets a dangerous precedent, and I feel like yes and no, because as long as there's that ability for Congress to overturn it, and 2/3 is tough, but a president, I would think, would only go so far. Now, there are some Republicans that would probably hang with President Trump till the bitter end, but I think there's at least
there have been a lot of Republicans and certainly in the Senate who have voiced skepticism of this and how he's doing this. I mean, I guess the other piece of this is how does this play politically?
Yeah.
And my thought is regardless, this is the politically smart move for Trump.
Oh, absolutely. Yeah.
Do you agree? Yeah.
Oh, definitely. I mean, he had to do this, and he did it, and I'm sure his base will reward him for it.
Well, not only his base, but I think what it does is it's going to really put the pressure on Democrats who are opposing this, who will appear to be opposing Trump just because they're opposing Trump.
Oh, I disagree with that.
All I want to do is build this reasonable this wall, and we already have so many miles of it constructed already. Why can't you do it? Why isn't border security a problem? And what'll happen is he'll have all these Democrats. It does in the House now saying that border security is not a national emergency, and that can be played as border security is not a national problem. And I think the voters, by and large, do view border security as a big issue, whether you want to call it a national emergency or not.
Yeah. Well, I think that's an example of you being in your GOP bubble there, and so I think that will play very well with the people who are going to vote for Trump in the first place. But no, I mean, I think Democrats have been pretty clear that they're willing to spend considerable amounts of money to increase border security in ways that will actually have an effect on the things that President Trump says he's concerned about. But when, like something like 90% of the illegal drugs that come in through ports of entry, and the president doesn't really seem interested in that.
But to some extent, we already did that in the legislation.
Well, I mean, not nearly to a big enough extent. And I'm sure I know there are plenty of Democrats who would have been willing to go for a border security deal that would have beefed up a lot of those type of things without putting up walls that are of questionable utility at best.
No Democrat would have gone for any deal.
You're totally wrong about that, but that's okay.
Nope.
Okay, well, once again, Jay, you're wrong, but that's that one listener said, "My God, you're going to end the conversation saying you're wrong." What I mean by that is that there are plenty of Democrats who have gone on record as saying that they would spend a lot more money to do things like to beef up electronic enforcement, and to, now you might say when push comes to shove, they wouldn't have done that.
I don't really understand, but
what do you mean?
Well, no, I just don't really understand the electronic enforcement and how that works and why a wall isn't superior to that.
Well, I think walls are. Anyway, that's a whole nother issue. But yeah.
Yeah. No, I'm just saying. You got the camera and somebody crosses and you watch them. There they go. And at that point they're in the country and you apprehend them and they claim asylum and then they're let go till their hearing, and then here we are. I mean, I think that's the way Trump would see it is, look, the idea is to keep people out in the first place,
right?
To prevent illegal entrance in the first place, as opposed to have people enter illegally, and now we can detain them and have to take care of them. So
yeah, well, and I think on that particular issue, you might very well have a point, but it seems to me that on both sides, particularly on the president's side, that it's really just more of a symbolic thing. We want this big thing that keeps these poor criminal brown people out of our country, and that's
boy.
I mean, come on, there's a huge segment of the Trump base that's how they see it. These these
I think
un-American brown people who we don't like, who don't speak like us, who don't share our real American values, and keep them out. And they'll use some other terms that are not nearly as nice as that.
I suppose there are those out there like that, but there are also a lot who are concerned with the rule of law and would welcome legal immigrants, but have a problem with having an unsecured border and no control over who's coming or going. But we can move on.
Sure.
And again, the problem, Mike, the problem is the bad hombres. We had to get that in there. In other news, in probably bigger news, the Trump Kim summit regarding North Korea's nuclear weapons program broke down on Thursday, with President Trump walking away from the summit. North Korea had wanted relief from sanctions and said it was prepared to dismantle its Yongbyon nuclear complex, which has a reactor and also a plutonium reprocessing plant. The U.S. had wanted broader dismantling, basically saying, look, no, we want you to dismantle your entire nuclear program, including numerous undeclared sites that we believe exist where the North Koreans are continuing to enrich uranium. There's sort of some finger pointing, as you might expect, from both sides. But Mike, what is your take on the summit and the walking away from the summit?
Okay, mark this down.
And I think this is going to surprise people, because I bet we're going to be more or less on the same place on this.
No, mark this down, Jay. I'm with the president on this one. He was right to walk away from this. It seems to me pretty clear what North Korea wants, and I don't think that's going to change. Is they want to get something for nothing, and we're right not to trust them. It was a bad deal, and I think removing any sanctions before they actually act in any way would be a huge mistake. So yeah, but again, it seems to me that this is what we had to have expected, right, from North Korea, because that's the game that they want to play. And until the pain on North Korea becomes so great that they can't play that game anymore, then they're just going to keep on doing this.
Yeah, I think that's exactly right. Trump was right to walk away. My concern with the first summit had been, look, are we giving North Korea what it wants, and that is legitimacy on the world stage by talking to them in exchange for nothing. But I think Trump followed it up sort of well with this, saying, listen, the first one was a nice, get to know you, and there was sort of this agreement in principle to start dismantling, and they did a couple symbolic things of blowing up sites that they probably weren't using anyway. But when it comes right down to it, we have not let our foot up, and I think that's a good thing, and I think that sends a good message to the world, in that we can say, listen, we tried negotiation, we tried to be reasonable here, but they're not going to play by these rules, or they're not going to play by, I guess, sort of the general understanding of fair play, at least at this point. And Kim may well want to be just the dictator of a small, impoverished but heavily armed country, and that may be the case.
Well, yeah, I think we have to expect that this is going to take years if we're going to get anywhere. So I think the approach that we can't expect anything right away, and this might be many years in the future, but keeping the lines of communication open and also keeping the pressure on, I think that's the way to do it. So really, in this whole thing, the only thing I can truly fault the president on is I would say his unthoughtful, off the cuff, maybe partially off the cuff, I don't know, remark that he said, well, Kim Jong-un told me that he didn't know about Otto Warmbier, and so I'm just going to assume that he didn't know, and that was just dumb on his part. And then I guess he tried to follow it up by saying, oh, I love Otto, and I think about him all the time, and I had to roll my eyes. Like, I find that incredibly hard to believe.
No, I think that's more just kind of like a New Yorkie Trumpism type thing. Right? It's almost like, look, he says it and he knows it's absolute BS. And he knows that what Kim is saying is absolute BS. but he sort of puts it out there to, you know what I mean?
No, I think he does it.
I don't know that. I don't think it's anything intentional. And again, maybe different people would have done it differently. But
it's a pattern, obviously. People have pointed out saying, well, on the Khashoggi thing, he said, well, the crown prince told me that it's all good. He didn't know anything. And so it makes him look credulous and foolish, basically, when maybe what he's trying to do is try to, in his mind, build some bridges with these people. But I think it's a big mistake, whatever his motives are on that.
I don't know. I really think it's more just almost like a verbal tick kind of thing. And because I've done it. Gosh, there's plenty of in the legal system. It is frowned upon that you should go after your opponent and accuse them of doing things in bad faith or being sneaky or lying to you or lying to the court. It's like a really big deal. So often what you will say is, well, opposing counsel has represented to me that X, Y, and Z. Here's the facts as I understand them.
Sure. No, and I get that.
Who am I to question? Who am I to question them? And you put it out there, and I really think that's just kind of the way he talks and thinks. I don't think there was necessarily I'm trying to flatter Kim.
I'd buy that, except so if he would have just said, I asked him about this, and here's what he told me, and he just stopped there.
Yeah.
But then he had to add, I believe him. That's the dumb part, and I would say the reprehensible part, and I think that's just a big mistake. So yeah, if he'd gone just as far as you said, say, well, hey, I asked him too. I was curious. Here's what he told me, and then you stop there, and you're not insulting him but you're clearly making it, obvious that you're not just being some credulous fool who says, well, okay, you said you don't know anything about it.
Right. So, but I mean, you don't think that. I mean, do you really think that Trump believes that Kim had nothing to do with it or didn't know about it?
I don't think that Donald Trump is a stupid person, and you'd have to be a stupid person to believe that. So no.
Just like the Crown Prince, I think he knows.
Yeah, and so why he? Yeah. Anyway. So yeah, before we move on, Jay, I wanted to take a minute to thank our newest supporters.
Oh, awesome!
Do that, and let's see who we have here. Our newest Patreon monthly supporters are Dave and Matthew, who just became a supporter sometime this morning or something like that. So
wow,
yeah, thank you guys, and
thank you guys.
Yeah, Dave wrote in after he became a Patreon supporter. He said, "I just joined because of Kristen. The politics guys needs a female voice, and Kristen is it. Please keep her on." Let's see.
All right.
And then he said, that said, I implore Kristen, Mike, and everyone on the show to read the following. Number 1, Selfie, How We Became So Self-Obsessed and What It's Doing to Us by Will Storr. And number 2, The Coddling of the American Mind, How Good Intentions and Bad Ideas Are Setting Up a Generation for Failure, by Jonathan Haidt and Greg Lukanioff. And actually, I should mention that not only
Greg Lukanioff has done a lot of other stuff. I'm trying to think, but yes, I'm a fan.
Well, and I actually interviewed him about that very book. So folks who haven't heard that, you can check back in our archives. And yeah, those are great recommendations. And so I wanted to pass that along. And also, one of our other Patreon supporters, Seth, wrote in to say, I just wanted to take a moment and thank you and Jay for the in-depth policy reviews at the $5 level. They're worth far more. It's nice to hear. He says, hearing reasonably intelligent people go back and forth on these issues, devoid of the pride that all too often leads to shouting matches, is priceless. You both accuse each other of using logical fallacies. You both understand what that means, and you're able to continue to debate without shouting. You should both be on the recruiting poster for political discourse. I would also like to send kudos. Nice. Yeah, he said, I'd also like to send kudos on your most recent episode with Kristen for the same reason. So thank you so much for that. And I should mention that we're in the midst of kind of doing a different kind of policy thing. Our first policy thing Jay and I did was healthcare, and we really wanted to take that to a deeper level. And so we're doing it actually in print, kind of going back and forth with sort of dueling posts. And we hope to be able to have that up on the Patreon site for supporters at that $5 or more a month level in the not too distant future. I think we're getting close to wrapping that up, and it's been it's been a really interesting experience, and I really like that that sort of written dialogue format, because then when Jay says something, it gives me more time to sort of to digest it and to think about what he had to say. And so it's more than just reacting. I can actually take a time and sort of consider and maybe refute and maybe agree in part. And so it's been a great experience, Jay. I think I think you would agree with me on that. Yeah.
Yeah, it's been fun. It's sort of like the show, but we're typing.
Yeah, exactly. And
we're typing, and we have more time to like actually look stuff up.
Yeah, which is kind of
as
nice,
opposed to just
Well, I think that's kind of, I think dialogue is so important, but the problem sometimes with kind of in the moment dialogue is, and you can't help but react, because let's take 5 minutes and look up the facts on this, that makes for pretty bad podcasting, obviously. And so that's the kind of thing we can do. So anyway, just wanted to mention that, and as a little bit of a break in, but I will let you get back now to moving us on to our next story here.
I am in charge. The next story that we're talking about, and it's sort of a twofer, goes to healthcare in the U.S. On the policy front, on Wednesday, House Democrats introduced their version of a Medicaid for all bill. It's House Resolution 676, if you're keeping score. Primary sponsors were Pramila Jayapal of Washington and B. Dingle of Michigan, and it garnered 107 co-signers, all Democrats. Under the bill, the federal government would pay for all health coverage, and we say all, we mean all, including copays, deductibles. Employers and private insurers would be barred from providing benefits that duplicates this Medicare for all, but could provide supplemental coverage. The Democrats, again, in my opinion, oversold this a little bit by making statements. This was Representative Jayapal. Americans are literally dying because they can't afford treatment. And we can get into that in a minute. But the estimated price tag is about $30 trillion with a T in the first decade. And we paid for by a proposed wealth tax and other tax increases on the rich and the other malefactors of great wealth. So, Mike, I guess this is the new excitement. It's a little bit different than the Bernie Medicare for All bill. I would say slightly more moderate. But again, there's I think some concern if you start to look at the polling numbers. Medicare for All as a slogan polls wonderfully, particularly among Democrats. But when you start to get into the details, like we're going to eliminate your private health insurer, the support drops off pretty precipitously. So where do you think this goes in the House, and I guess also in the companion piece in the Senate?
Well, first off, I want to say I thank you for putting the phrase "malefactors of great wealth" in there. It's one of my favorite phrases. I love it. I'm glad you worked it in. But so, to me, this is really interesting politically, in that here we have a few years ago, we have Bernie Sanders and his Medicare for All program, which would cost around the same thing, basically. And now we have this, which actually ups the ante. It makes Bernie's program look maybe not moderate, but it goes even further, much more generous in benefits, and a much quicker implementation time. And this, to me, is kind of
2 years. Yeah,
the reason why Bernie's going to have problems this time out, more so than last time, because at least the leading lights in the party now are sort of kind of a march to the progressive left, and you have to kind of make sure you're to the left of most of your opponents, basically, if you're looking for the Democratic presidential nomination. And that certainly, concerns
We're really
me.
getting into sort of a Lenin versus Trotsky kind of situation here.
Well, yeah, I don't know if I'd agree with the analogy exactly, but yeah, I mean, it basically what you're getting at, yeah. And so that to me is the clear politics of it, and the fact that it is over 100 co-sponsors, tells you that. But in terms of the actual policy on it, well, a lot of folks, understandably, are focusing on the cost at $30 trillion over 10 years. Now, it's important, though, to put that in context. It wouldn't really be a cost increase if we're looking at healthcare spending writ large in this country. What it would really be is a transfer of who's paying for healthcare spending. In other words, since this would essentially eliminate the private healthcare system for all intents and purposes. It would basically mean that instead of people and their employees paying for healthcare, that payment would be transferred to the government, for better or for worse. So it's not like it would necessarily increase spending overall. It would just change who pays for it, basically. And the argument on the left, and I have a lot of sympathy for this, is by moving the payment over to a single payer, you would achieve certain efficiencies that you can't get in our mishmash of a system. So in that sense, I like it. I like the idea. I like the goal of Medicare for all. I like the goal of single payer. And I hope one day, I hope I live to see us get to that point. But, and this is a big but, this program, I think, is not the way to do it. I think it does too much. I think it moves too fast. I have a big problem with the fact that it's more generous than essentially any other program in almost any of the other OECD countries. The whole idea of covering essentially everything and no co-payments, I've got a big problem with that. I've also got a big problem with the fact that it would not allow people to buy supplemental private insurance, as a lot of other countries do. I think.
Well, as my understanding, this would allow it would allow, but the question is, would that market exist?
So I read it. I read it as at least in its first form as it would not allow supplemental insurance, and so to me that's hugely problematic. I mean, you can go too far with that and just end up recreating a two-tiered system, basically. And so I understand why people might want to do that, but to me, this is just too much, and it's much more kind of a progressive statement of just crazed idealism. And I'm okay for certain idealism, so I agree in theory with the goal.
Virtue signaling writ large.
Yeah, really. And so, I mean, I like Bernie's plan more than this. It was more moderate. I would go for something even more moderate, kind of like starting with a Medicare buy-in for people who are, say, 50 or above or 55 and above, and kind of going more moderate and sort of seeing what the effects of that are. Because, I mean, Jed, we've talked about this temperamentally. I am a conservative, meaning that while I share liberal policy goals, I have a problem with making sweeping changes and just sort of hoping everything works out, because with sweeping changes, you tend to get huge unintended consequences. So that's why I'm leery about this sort of thing. So that's kind of where I stand on this.
Yeah. Well, and again, to me, the idea that, what happens when you have free everything is it inevitably is going to lead to rationing.
Well, nothing's free. I mean, and we should know. I mean,
right. And I appreciate that you mentioned that, because I'm concerned there are 109 people in the House of Representatives who think otherwise. But
well, I mean, and that idea of rationing. I mean, there's no way that healthcare isn't rationed. I mean, healthcare has to be rationed simply because there's much. I mean, it's a scarce resource. It costs money.
There's supply and there is demand.
Exactly. And so really the question isn't, will healthcare be rationed? Because the answer to that is always yes. The question is, how are we going to do the rationing? And right now we have kind of various ways of doing it. And part of that rationing is based on ability to pay, and that, and I think we should do less of that rationing. You think that's where you and I would disagree. You probably are comfortable with more rationing based on that, but certainly.
Well,
go ahead.
I'd say I'm more comfortable with letting the market make the more efficient determinations of how.
Yeah.
How what's the word I'm looking for?
How to kill people who can't afford healthcare.
How to kill people, exactly, because that's what we're all about. It's killing people.
Yeah, and I know. More seriously, I know you're not about killing people, obviously, or even maiming them. But but I think that's where you and people on the right are just sort of blinded. I would say, as I think that our market-based system is a disaster, and is a disaster for a lot of reasons. And that's something that for folks, I mean, I know we can't go so deep on this right here and right now, but if you're interested in much deeper thoughts,
read the transcript when we do it.
Yeah, we're really getting into that a lot, because this is something I feel very strongly about a single-payer system.
So we will obviously keep reporting on this. There will be a lot more to talk about on the political front as well as the policy front. But I wanted to shift to another event relating to healthcare. And this was
before you do. Can I just ask you one thing? I don't know if we're ever going to get into it again. So if you don't mind, on the left, there's this new idea kind of how do we pay for all this stuff, this idea of modern monetary theory. And I'm sure you've heard a little bit about this, but basically saying that we can just kind of print money because we're the United States, essentially, and we don't have to worry about that. And to me, this is incredibly troubling.
That reminds me a lot of like the old monetary theory, like that they had in Weimar Germany and that they had in a lot of South America for the 70s and 80s. And
well, to me, it's the problem is it seems to me it's like the new left, or part of the new left. I shouldn't say the whole new left, but part of the new left's version of tax cuts that more than pay for themselves. Because it seems like both sides are trying to elements of both sides are trying to get around the inconvenient fact that you have to pay for the stuff you want. And whether you're on the left or the right, I can understand the political imperative to say, hey, look, we found this cool way to get something for nothing. But the fact of the matter is there's always going to be a price to pay. And if we don't pay it today, we're going to ask the future to pay for it. And I have a huge problem with taking those burdens and putting them on our kids, grandkids, that sort of thing. Now, hey, I don't have any kids, so maybe I can just say, well, but
stick my kids with
it. Stick your kids with it. But I think that is just hugely irresponsible, even if it's incredibly politically expedient. And I said that about the Republican tax cuts, and I wouldn't feel right not saying that about modern monetary theory, because to me, this is not a partisan issue. This is just an issue of kind of, political expedience overriding, unfortunately, responsibility.
Well, I appreciate that. And again, I would disagree with you on the tax cuts paying for themselves. I think that's more an issue of if growth hits the right number, maybe they do. And also just to put things in comparison and with the caveat that the 30 trillion we're talking about is not necessarily new expenditures, it is shifting of expenditures. But the debt that would supposedly be run up by the Republican tax cut would be 1 trillion over a decade, as opposed to this is 30. Now, again, I understand this is a different situation where you would say this is money that we're paying anyway. It's just a difference of who's paying it and how it's being paid. But no, I'm against new monetary theories, you might say. But pivoting to something else. No, go ahead.
No, I was going to say, as actually a lot of liberal economists are. I mean, even Paul Krugman came out and said, it just seems kind of hocus pocusy, essentially, to me. So there's that, and it's still kind of a fringy sort of thing. But then again, so was that whole Laffer curve and trickle down and all that. But that became part of Republican orthodoxy to a certain extent, and I just hope the same sort of magical thinking doesn't take over on the left.
All right. Well, as Milton Friedman famously said, and Robert Heinlein repeated. Ain't no such thing as a free lunch.
There you go.
That is probably the biggest principle of economics that everyone should keep in mind. But there were people looking or asking about free lunches, I suppose, in Congress last week, where the numerous CEOs of pharmaceutical companies were called before the Senate to testify regarding their pricing procedures. And this is something that we talk about in the book. And also I have a sort of a personal anecdote to share on this, that it is so Byzantine, the way pharmaceuticals are priced. Uh-huh. And I would absolutely agree with you that there is room for some sort of change there in how we've created this system, because again, it's so strange, so Byzantine, where you have insurers paying, but then they get discounts, and then there's rebates, and then there's drugs that come off, are highly profitable, but only for a certain period, because then they come off patent and are available generically, and then you also have different pricing points for different buyers. to me, that the problem there is a lack of a true market, because there were so many of these distortions that are sort of have been built in.
Yeah.
So yeah, generally, I mean, I guess what most of these CEOs said was that they don't want to be villainized, and they sort of indicated that, look, these, if Congress is going to do something, it needs to be sort of an across the board thing, so everyone's starting with a level playing field. But the idea is that in some cases, if they were to go for what you suggested a lot of times, a Medicare pricing for all, like lowest, so there were some drugs that would be essentially free. And as we just said, there's no such thing as free. But these companies have been able to give that drug away because it's sort of a loss leader, if you will. They sort of buy goodwill and they make up for it with other drugs. But what were your thoughts on the hearings? Other than I'm not necessarily a fan of having CEOs dragged before Congress, but
well, I think
you probably enjoy it better. But
sure, absolutely, yeah, no, I definitely do. Because I actually believe in a malefactor's a great wealth thing. I mean, usually, ironically.
And there they were, yeah.
But I think, of course, they're going to say it's not our fault, because that's what the CEOs do when they're dragged before Congress, even if it is entirely their fault. But in this case, I think they have at least part of a point. Their big thing was, well, we have to set our sticker prices high because of pressure from the insurance companies and the pharmacy benefit managers who negotiate these rebates. And so
we can have the higher sticker price, and therefore it looks like we're cutting them a better deal, and they can say we got a better deal on this.
Which reminds me of like Men's Warehouse and Joseph A. Bank, where they say, you walk in and it's like a suit is $400, but everything's 70% off, like 90% of the time, that sort of thing. You know? So obviously that's a ridiculous system. And it seemed to me what the pharmaceutical companies were saying, a couple of things. One thing they said is, well, hey, why don't you go ahead and do something about these rebates, make these rebates illegal or make them harder, or, limit those. And I think that's a good idea. Now,
right. And again, that would put everyone sort of on an equal footing and bring back some more market sensibility to it.
But the question is then, if Congress did that, would the drug companies then respond by lowering their sticker prices? And I think we have good reason to be skeptical. I think they would lower them. We would see how much of what they were doing was simply because of the rebates. And so I think there's a reason for skepticism, but I do think that that's a big distortion, and I would like to see Congress act. So in that way, I agree with these pharmaceutical executives, at least, to that point. The second thing is, one of the big things they mention is, well, we spend billions of dollars in research and development, and it costs literally billions of dollars to bring a new drug to market. And so that's why we need to have high prices to pay for this. And I know the reflexive claim on the left, and I understand that, because that's what I tend to say BS, on that. But so I did some digging, and I looked at their profit margins. And in 2014, 2016, which was the last period I could get data on, Biopharma's profit margins were around 16%, which is way lower than computer sciences, way lower than beverages, aerospace, trucking. I mean, so they don't have horrifically huge profit margins. And also, their stock prices aren't crazy, suggesting to me that, the market doesn't think that Big Pharma is basically minting money here. And not only that, but they spend more in R&D than any sector really, except for the semiconductor industry. So I think there's something to be said for that argument. And I think many people on the left just dismiss that too quickly. But that being said, it also occurs to me that what this means then is that the high prices for drugs in the United States are basically subsidizing drug prices in the rest of the world. Or kind of to put it in Trumpian terms, we're being played by suckers by our so-called allies, right? Who are, isn't
you're coming around.
Well, yes. I mean, that's the argument,
that's exactly right.
And so basically,
and that's,
go ahead.
Yeah. And that's sort of one of those, again, market distortions that, you say of a global market, but they can't really sell these at market prices in a lot of the globe.
And so if they have a sucker that's willing to pay all this money to subsidize the other people who are striking a better bargain. Well, of course they're going to do that. So really, the fault is ours for being too generous to these companies, because if we put more pressure on them, then they would have to put more pressure on these other governments, and the burden could be spread out. So we're paying for low drug prices for the rest of the world, really. And I totally agree that that's unfair, and we should do something about that. So Donald Trump's right on that, My God, I said that twice in one episode.
See? You're coming, son. This. I'm going to mention this, and again, this is a personal anecdote, and everyone gets mad at me about this because it's not data and so forth. But as I think I've said before, I serve on the board of a nonprofit that provides healthcare for the uninsured and underinsured. We recently merged with a new nonprofit that is, as a part of that, became what's called a federally qualified health center. Which, again, I have to tell you, this is incredibly complicated. And once you get into
sounds
this,
like it, yeah,
yes, because again, my problem, the old nonprofit that I worked for could not qualify for a federally qualified health center because of the area it was located didn't have like a high enough concentration of people in poverty or met other certain metrics. If you had that, then you could qualify, and if you qualified, you would be presumptively Medicaid eligible for all patients. And you would get reimbursed at a higher rate than this other place that's, half a mile away, but, falls in a different demographic cohort. And again, it's just wheels within wheels within wheels. And so anyway, but what I was told is with this nationally or the federally qualified health insurance program, we recently opened up a pharmacy at this nonprofit. So, which is, hey, great, we're getting drugs to needy people, and the folks, encouraged all the board members to sign up also to get their prescriptions filled there because it would be so much cheaper. And when I say so much cheaper, let me give you an example. I mean, I may have mentioned this before, and I don't want to get into too much personal stuff, but my youngest daughter is type 1 diabetic, and needs to have insulin to live. The list price for a vial of insulin, it's 30 days, is $400.
That's just nuts. Yeah.
Our insurance, which again, we have good insurance, and so we pay a substantial discount on that, and can get it for like $135, and then there's sort of a max, deductible. Once you hit a certain thing, you're fine. So. Again, total, it comes out to, probably $600-700 a year on insulin. Not cheap, but manageable.
And just to point out, and I just wanted to give people a sense of how crazy that is the cost to actually produce one dose of insulin is like under $4. So I mean, this
one dose though is really like minuscule.
And so, but
if you're talking by the ounce, insulin's like, I think it's like the second most expensive fluid ever in the world.
Okay, but I mean, this is
Mercury's number one.
The point is they're making at that amount of money, that's a pretty huge profit margin, and I would guess it's in part because, of course, the market for that is just so incredibly distorted, which is kind of the point that you're making, I think, right?
Well, that market's distorted because again, you got to have it.
Yeah, exactly.
And there's also it's sort of a limited number of people, right?
Right.
It's just a genetic thing. So many people have it. It's not as if it gets bigger, so you get more economies of scale. All right. So that isn't the crazy part, though. If I were to have this prescription prescribed by a doctor at the federally qualified health center, the cost of insulin to the pharmacy would be 15 cents per vial.
Wow. So that's definitely a loss leader.
$400 list price. Insurance, you pay about, $130, $150. If it's through this government program, 15 cents.
That's crazy.
Now, again, they make up for it and they say, well, we have a copay that's like a sliding copay. So it could end up being like $10.15.
Still, but still, that's, yeah.
But that's, I mean, just a glimpse of how sort of goofed up this is, and quite honestly, I have mixed feelings about would I change my doctor and prescription to take advantage of this discount that's run through the federal government. So, I mean, obviously, look, there's a real price for insulin somewhere in there. It certainly isn't 15 cents a vial, and it's probably not $400 a vial.
Right.
And if we stripped away some of these other pieces and kickbacks and shouldn't say kickbacks, rebates and special pricing and so forth, you might get closer to that price. But that just really astounded me.
That is amazing. Yeah, 15 cents. My God,
it was like that. And I was, because again, here's the other piece of it though. Someone somewhere is paying for the difference between that 15 cents and 100 something. And the other thing, this is the other fascinating way I learned how it worked. What happens is if you are insured, so if I were to go to the federal health clinic with my private insurance, what they would do is they would then take the payment from private insurance that private insurance would otherwise pay somebody else. So let's assume it's that it'd be more than 150, but so it's 200 or something. So in that case, the federally qualified health center buys the insulin for 15 cents and then gets payment reimbursement from my insurer for $200.
Right. Yeah.
Which it, quite generously, then it says uses to pay for treatment for other people and so forth. But
it's got the whole system has this Alice in Wonderland sort of quality. It's just and it would be funny if it weren't so tragic, I mean, and people have, it is just one anecdote, but there are millions of people who have stories like that. I could tell a story about my MRI extravaganza experience from a couple of years ago, which is a similar kind of thing. It's so depressing. It really is. And I
had another friend who was telling me that. Again, it was he was prescribed a arthritis type drug, and again, he could qualify to get it through directly. And this was goofy. He could even get it directly from pharmacy or from the drug manufacturer. It's sort of a rebated, basically free, right? I mean, it was like $10 kind of thing, but to get it through his insurance, it would cost $400.
Right. Yeah.
So again, I think, I would agree. My injection to this would be market transparency.
I definitely think much more price transparent. That's one thing that you and I might disagree on the mechanisms by which that transparency would happen, but we definitely agree that we need a lot more transparency and clear pricing on these things for sure.
Yeah. So, all right. So we're running long, but obviously the other thing we wanted to talk about, just for the sort of fun and the spectacle of it, is that Trump fixer Michael Cohen, and really calling him a fixer, is that really the best word for him?
Can we call him a capo or something like that? I don't know.
Well, I'm just saying, what has he fixed? I mean, he really hasn't.
True, good point.
If you we're looking for someone to fix your problems, this guy would not be it. But he testified before the House Oversight Committee on Wednesday as Trump was negotiating with a Rocket Man. And he indicated that, among other things, Trump had ordered the payment and paid for the hush money, or as you might more euphemistically put it, non-disclosure contractual arrangement to former porn star Stormy Daniels. He also intimated that Trump knew ahead of time that the WikiLeaks leak dump of pilfered DNC emails was coming out. He allegedly continued to discuss building a Trump Tower in Moscow into 2017. That is, of course, contradicted Cohen's prior testimony to Congress. He described Trump as a racist con man and a cheat. And sort of the list goes on. But I guess the biggest takeaway, and I mean, people might be disappointed we're not talking more about this, but the sense is that there wasn't anything really new or surprising that we hadn't heard before on this, or there wasn't any new piece of evidence of documentary evidence that would move the needle one way or the other. This was
I mean, did you see
sense of
that?
this?
Did you see that list of evidence that he brought? It was pretty laughable. I mean, there was really
right. Well, he produced. He had a check from Donald Trump.
Yeah.
I
mean, there was nothing
written,
there that was anything. In fact, that part of his evidence was a series of tweets, I think, and other things. And I just thought, there's nothing, just like you, there's nothing here that surprised me. And I felt like we had to talk about this because so many people were focused on it because of the sensationalistic, nature of it. But honestly, the only thing I think we can absolutely conclude from this is that Donald Trump surrounds himself with sleazy, amoral people. But, we already knew that.
But we knew that.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah. So I love one of my favorite political bloggers, who's Kevin Drum from Mother Jones. I love how he put it. He said, it's clear that Trump treated even trusted associates with the caution and animal cunning of a mob boss who's aware that even the most private conversations might be bugged. I'm like, yeah, that sounds right to me. I mean, there's no smoking gun here. We're not going to get a smoking gun. And I'm disappointed too. I would have loved to have a tape of Donald Trump saying, yeah, pay the hush money to the prostitute or whatever, but we're not going to get that because Donald Trump
actress,
whatever. Yeah, exactly. Well, there were prostitutes involved too, I'm sure. But but the point being is that Donald Trump is, I would say, a horrible human being, but he's smart. He's very smart, and he does have that at least animal cunning, and so he's not going to do anything that dumb as much as I would love him to. As much as I would love to see him gone for that reason, I just don't expect that to happen. And, I agree with the Republicans who say that Michael Cohen is just a totally worthless witness because he's such a sleazy, amoral, lying character.
Yeah, he is not. He is not the best witness that you would hope for.
I don't trust any of them, including the president, So that to me, it was just a lot of spectacle. And maybe, there's some people saying, well, maybe that gives the House investigators some things to kind of look into, but I think they already knew this stuff. So to me, it was just political theater, really, unfortunately.
Yeah. Well, and the other thing, I mean, there were weird sort of things like, well, he thought he overheard a discussion between Trump and Donald Jr.,
right,
which may have been in relation to the Trump Tower meeting with the Russians.
Yeah.
But again, it was also very hazy. It's sort of like, well, he and Don Jr. said, is there a meeting? Yes, they're having a meeting. I mean, it was just so, it's completely nondescript. There's also, I mean, the Democrats have taken this sort of, they're going after this Trump Tower in Moscow bit, which to me seems so fanciful. Like if that somehow, Trump's plan was to, first I'll get elected president. Then I will use that influence to coddle up to Putin, and then I will build my Trump Tower in Moscow. That seems to be an overly complicated plan to build a hotel. Any plan that begins with first I'll get elected president. It just,
Well, I think partly I go back to this idea, and it seems very plausible to me that if we start from the assumption that Donald Trump, up until the very end, never thought he'd actually be elected president, a lot of this stuff makes very good sense.
Absolutely.
And
that makes absolute more sense that he's planning on this and he's going to run. Look, I'm not going to win. I don't want to go around trashing Putin because look, I'm going to lose and I'm trying to build this hotel anyway.
Yeah, there were so many other things like that.
Much more sense than I'm a Russian secret agent.
And then all of a sudden it's like, oh wow, I won. Okay, now we have to really scramble to figure out how to make all this work out because man, I'm in deep in a lot of things, and thank God we have a Republican Congress because I didn't expect to be under this kind of scrutiny. So there you go. So yeah.
But it was I suppose entertaining for a lot of people, and it's sort of funny. Just people I overhear talking. I mean, some were really praising Cohen as listen. He is sort of, was sort of Saul on the road to Damascus, and he's seen the light now, and he's oh yeah,
my God.
But again, these are people who are very much predisposed, and look, it's a man who's certainly done wrong, but now he's trying to put it right, and
wow, that just blows. I guess if you're comparing him,
I do. I really think there is a constituency that look, if Hitler came back to life, And when we're called before Congress to testify against Trump, people would say, "Look, this guy's got a lot, say what you will, but we should hear him out." So
no, you're right. I mean, there are,
and I'm not saying Cohen is as bad as Hitler.
No,
but
there are deranged partisans on both sides who will just look for any excuse to. No, you're absolutely right. Sure.
Yeah. So I think we both agree. Probably upshot. Maybe it was kind of some fun reality TV, but nothing new or really substantive that's going to come out of the Cohen testimony.
Yeah, and the thing to me, and we talked about this last, obviously, before we go, it seems to me that it's too bad that something like this overshadows something like the whole, big pharma thing, because I get it. That's a lot less inherently interesting, right? But it's so much more important to people, and yet that pushed that story almost entirely off of
right.
The radar.
Quite honestly, what does it for the average American? What difference does it make? How if Trump paid off a porn star?
Yeah, but
everyone sort of already knew about anyway. You know what I mean?
Exactly. But for the average American saying, "Well, how am I going to afford $100 to pay for my kids' drugs this month?" That's much bigger. So, but
one last thing I want to bounce off you though. What are your thoughts? And there were some complaints, and I think rightfully so, about the timing of the Cohen testimony when Trump is, negotiating with Kim. Typically the sort of the idea that politics stops at the border. I think there's something to be said that you tend not to want to do something to intentionally embarrass the president when he's out negotiating with let's call him a hostile foreign leader.
I don't think there's much to that.
So I think my take is no. Did it make a difference? No. Was it sort of classless? Yes.
Yeah, I think
they could have waited a day or a week, and it would have been exactly the same.
This president needs no help embarrassing himself. I mean, so I don't think it was really.
Well, agreed. And again, I think if it was a different president, let's put it this way: if it was George Herbert Walker Bush, who was going to a summit, and
sure.
Congress did this, and but again, the fact is that this has already sort of been, factored into the equation with Trump. Everyone knew this when they elected him, and I'm sure Kim is familiar with this, and it's. Yeah. So
no, here's where I sound like a cranky old guy.
I'd say stay classy, Nancy. You could have done it a week later and not had that.
Our political discourse has been so just sadly degraded that that's hardly even a concern anymore. Where I just kind of sigh and say, yeah, that's about what you'd expect. So anyway.
No.
Well, I think we did run kind of long, but I think we had some pretty good discussions. And I should mention, right, Jay, as soon as we're done with this, there were actually some policy things we wanted to get to, but we just didn't have the time for. Like, for instance, that big gun control bill that the House passed, and something I really wanted to talk about, the Born Alive Abortion Survivors Protection Act that Ben Sass was a sponsor.
Oh, I should have mentioned. Yeah, there is one classification that the Medicare for All people would not cover. And I'll give you a guess as to what that classification is. But we'll get to that.
Yeah, but we're going to get to that in our supporters bonus show, which we're going to record right after we are done with this. And so if you are a supporter, that should be in your podcast feed by the time you hear this. That is if I'm doing my job right. And if you're not a supporter, hey, you can just go to patreon.com/politicsguys. That's patreon.com/politicsguys, or just politicsguys.com/support. And you can become a supporter. Also, if you haven't yet, subscribing to the show really does help us out, as does sharing episodes and rating the show. Leaving reviews on iTunes or wherever you're listening to it would be great. We really would appreciate that. The executive producers of the Politics Guys are Michael Baranowski, Jay Carson, Bruce Johnson, Will Moreno, and Benji Fishman. Today's show is produced by Jay Carson and Michael Baranowski. We'll be back with a new show on Wednesday. We hope you'll join us.